Hello, everyone. This is Doug Campbell-John, and on this week's episode of Revenue Renegades, I'm excited to welcome Godard Abel, the CEO and co-founder of G2. Welcome to the show, Godard.
Yeah, great to be here with you, Doug.
Thank you. You are a highly successful repeat entrepreneur. You basically had this $400 million exit of Big Machines to Salesforce. You could have just said, great, I'm going to go sit on a beach. Instead, you start G2. What was the light bulb moment that kind of caused you to jump in the ring again?
Well, I think a lot of it was driven by our frustration with the status quo in enterprise software. And a big part of that, honestly, was Gartner and traditional analysts. And I think our frustration as entrepreneurs was it just took forever to get third-party validation. Because I remember when we were building Big Machines, it took us 9 years to get in the Gartner report, 12 years to become the leader in the time they called it sales configuration. And obviously, ultimately, it worked out great. The company was acquired by Oracle, but we thought it really slowed down our journey. And I think even more importantly for our customers, and eventually at Big Machines, we did have success selling to companies like GE, GE Energy, and they made these huge turbines, truly big machines. And I remember they discovered us, but I think it took us 9 years to sell GE as well. And then when we finally started working with them at Big Machines, they're like, wow, we wish we knew you existed about 3 years ago. We've been trying to develop the software in-house. And so we also saw that software buyers were having a huge discovery problem. And around the time we started G2, that's when Mark Andreessen said software is eating the world. Yep. And I think it was a prescient statement. By that, he meant there's going to be purpose-built apps, created for every vertical industry, every business process, every use case, every department. And so we also thought, wow, the world needs an online store where it's much easier to have a consumer-like shopping experience, maybe more like Amazon. Or at the beginning, we called G2 a Yelp for software. And because we also said, in software, we kind of felt like the analysts sometimes were like restaurant critics that couldn't eat the food. Yep. They kind of stand outside the restaurant. They'd ask you for some reference customers, ask them, hey, what was, what the food tastes like, or what was it like using the software? And we're like, hey, why not just ask the users? Right. That's also real customers for reviews. And when we started G2, that really didn't exist for enterprise software. And so that was really our founding mission, to make it easier for software buyers to discover the best apps based on trusted peer reviews and to help sellers more quickly validate their solutions to win the trust of those customers. And so ultimately, we want to be a software marketplace where it's easy for that software buyer and seller to connect.
So, and you corrected me. I was referring to your first company that was exited to Oracle. Then second one was Salesforce, and then G2. So, you've had a string of great successes. For the kids listening to this, who are a few years younger than you and I, in the old days, and I assume this still exists, but I just haven't lived it for a while. Is you spent a ton of money as a software vendor and a ton of time basically sucking up to Gartner and IDC and Forrester analysts and all this stuff with the hopes that you could get in their wave or quadrant or whatever kind of visual they had of the time. And to your point, a lot of it was payola. A lot of it was not about, not to paint everything with the same brush. There are great analysts out there, obviously, who really knew the space. But in general, it was, as you said, very far from real feedback coming from users. It was whatever the analyst had been spun into in their view of the world.
For sure. And I think even the great analysts, it's just a slow process. You've been part of those quadrant processes, but oftentimes it's 2 years from when you first get that survey till they actually publish it. And obviously everything in software changes in 2 years, and then they don't update it for 2 years. I remember in a world of CPQ, when we built our second one, SteelBrick, our second steel CPQ vendor, and we actually built that in parallel to G2. But when we were building that, we were quickly acquired by Salesforce within about 2 years. And, I think according to Gartner, we never existed. We never even made it into one of the reports.
Wow.
And I think that's only accelerating now, age of AI. Right. And I know, Doug, you're building coffee AI. You're reimagining CRM AI first. And you and I were just at Salesforce Venture Summit, and there's 100, just at that summit, there are probably 100 new AI startups. And I think they're all already on G2, and I imagine, though, none of them are yet in an analyst report. So I think in this age of AI especially, we think, and every week now, there's a different LLM that's winning. So I think now more than ever, right, to move at the speed of software and AI, We think different models need it.
So when you're building this in the early days, I mean, one of the challenges I remember talking to Reid Hoffman about this at LinkedIn is, marketplaces are challenging because obviously you've got to get both sides of the equation right. How did you think about growing that in the early days so you obviously have enough on both sides of that equation while maintaining quality?
Yeah, no, and I think that is hard building any marketplace. Certainly as Reed said, and obviously you guys did it very successfully at LinkedIn. But I remember even the first few years of LinkedIn, it was like kind of just an online resume. And I probably joined up as a member like 2003 or four. And then I think the first 2 years I'd go there like maybe once a month when somebody sent me an invite. So it's hard. And we found the same thing at G2. And especially, with this idea, Yelp for software, it'll be great. People will write reviews and we'll have great insights and buyers will come, but I think that whole process, it took about 5 years until it really became a business. And honestly, that's why I actually went to go build Steelbrick in parallel because I'm more of like a scale it guy.
Yeah.
And it took us so long to get the product market fit and get to critical mass of reviews and content and get software buyers coming. So actually, I turned it over to my co-founder, Tim, who was my product co-founder. He then actually did a great job bringing it to product market fit, bringing it to critical mass. And, but it was very hard. And I think that's always, and I built a couple of SaaS vendors, and honestly, that's much easier than building a marketplace because this whole dynamic of, and in G2's case, I remember we picked one category to start, which I do think is smart when you're building a marketplace.
Uh-huh.
And we learned there a bit from Yelp and their founder, Jeremy Stoppelman. He was a great founder. He'd written a bunch of blogs, but he also said for Yelp, they just picked one city. They did San Francisco first. And actually took them quite a while to figure out until they got these kind of hobby restaurant critics, which became the Yelp elite, to write a bunch of reviews. But they focused on just San Francisco, got that to a tipping point. Then they went to New York, Chicago, et cetera. Eventually now they're probably in like 200 cities around the world. And G2, we said, okay, let's start with just one category of software. So we picked just CRM.
Huh.
And that was also intentional because Big Machines was a CPQ app, which was a partner to many CRMs. So we knew Salesforce, we knew Oracle, we knew Microsoft, and we figured at least we can calibrate in the category we know. Plus, we knew a bunch of CRM customers because I think our day one strategy to get reviews, we put up a booth at Dreamforce. This was all the way back, I think, in 2013. We just put up a little booth and we're handing out $5 Starbucks cards for people to write a review of, CRM or related software. And that was just we had kind of an MVP, which really all it could do was capture reviews. And we just wanted to see, hey, would people leave B2B reviews? And then we also wanted to calibrate if we got reviews from users, could we then algorithmically rate the software? Would it actually make sense? And, but it was one category. And, even that one category took a couple months. And the most depressing part, I remember after Dreamforce, we were actually pretty excited. I think our goal was to hand out like 1,000 Starbucks cards, get 1,000 reviews. And we did that. And then we went back to the office. This was about 3 months after we started the company. We were looking at our Google Analytics and they have that real-time traffic feature. And there were literally 2 people on the site. And then I also remember we're looking at it and then like one user pops up in Europe and we're like, oh, this is so cool. And then it's like, it was from Austria, and I realized my dad lives there. So
Seeing how son is doing.
yeah. So then we were like, it's funny, most entrepreneurs, you have those moments in company building, like, is this just a bad idea? Like, should we quit? Or do we keep grinding and obviously figure out a way, to get that? For us, it's like kind of like first we had to get the reviews, the insights, then we had to get the buyer traffic. And only then could we monetize. But, we decided to stay at it, but it was a long grind to get, one category spinning. That probably took like 6 months. And then, it probably took 5 years to, let's say, get 20 categories spinning. And of course, today we have 2,000, but it took a long time.
What do you see as the best practices for people who kind of, as a software vendor, use G2 very well? And where do you see people kind of making some obvious mistakes?
Yeah. And I think probably the biggest mindset shift, even for me as an entrepreneur, is to learn that a bad review is actually good.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes we see companies reluctant to encourage reviews because they're afraid they're going to get some bad ones. Or they just try to filter and like, hey, I only want 5-star.
Right.
And there's actually a lot of research been done on this in the world of consumer reviews, where like on Amazon as a seller, you actually get lower conversion if you're 5.0 stars. And
Interesting.
the optimum for conversion is somewhere between 4.4 and 4.6. Because and I think we all intuitively know this as online shoppers. If something has like 100, all 5.0, you're not going to believe it.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
because even if the product's perfect, like you always know some customers always having a bad day. And I
Mhm.
forget a lot of times you even just have one crazy customer. And then secondly, most products don't work for every type of consumer. And so I think that's probably one of the biggest lessons because it could be true in enterprise software. Like let's say somebody like on Steelbrick, we might have gotten a review. Oh, I hate this. It doesn't integrate to Microsoft Dynamics.
Right.
But we would have been fine with that negative review because we were only focused on Salesforce. So negative review can one be helpful to a buyer because they see, oh, this product is not for Microsoft customers, it's only for Salesforce. But that can also be a feature because they see your limitations, and then you only get your ICP, coming to you that fits to you. And secondly, I think the other best practice, and this is also very common in consumer world, hey, respond to your negative reviews.
Right.
Because the other thing the buyer probably wants to see, like, oh, you had an outage and it was really frustrating. You were down for 2 hours at the end of my quarter. And if you reply, no, I'm really sorry, but we've improved our trust. We're ensuring it's never going to happen again. Or they're mad that you don't have some feature and you make a comment, no, we hear you, we're putting it on a roadmap. And you go back a week later and you're like, hey, we already shipped that feature, check it out. And
Mhm.
then the customer can update it, and then now you've actually built trust
Right.
because again, as a buyer, and I think the other behavior that's been studied on Amazon, people read negative reviews much more than positive reviews.
Right.
And it's also just human psychology because we get excited to buy something, anything.
Yeah.
And then at the end, right before you buy, you're always like, ooh, what's wrong with it?
Right.
You get this fear moment. And then if you can go see the 1-star reviews and see what's wrong with it doesn't affect you,
Yep.
or you see that the vendor is very responsive to problems and corrects them, then you're like, oh, okay, now I'll buy right away. So anyway, that's just a psychological shift. And then I think the real best practice is to do what we call in-app reviews. And, you can do this for coffee.ai as soon as you embed any kind of a feedback widget. Let's say you use Delighted or, and I think a lot of mobile apps also do this where they're always asking you for feedback. And then they're like, hey, do you love my app? And then they say, hey, by the way, would you leave a review on the App Store? So having some kind of an in-app process where customers are always giving you feedback. And then, you're always giving them an opportunity to share. And that way, you always have a critical mass of public reviews that's also generated. And I think that's what's going to help you stand out because people want authentic customer voice. And, there's so much noise now, especially in AI, right? Like, how do you break through? And you're not the only AI first CRM.
Right.
And that's true in just about every category of software. So I think the way you really stand out is by just having a lot of customer voice, a lot of authentic customer voice. And that just helps your buyers, your prospects trust you faster.
So you mentioned Delighted. Is that a tool that actually sits in your product and then would direct you to write a G2 review?
Yes. I mean, Delighted, it's a feedback, widget that you can use, if you're doing NPS or CSAT or
Okay.
whatever you're using for customer feedback. So it's just a simple widget. So you get feedback, and I know you've also obviously been a founder, entrepreneur, but also product leader. What entrepreneur and product leader doesn't love feedback? So one, you're getting feedback, and then, you can embed, and we have a little, make that easy, but we have a little tool you can embed in-app, we call it, but you just make that ask. And like I said, we recommend you do it continuously, and we recommend you ask everyone, even if they're upset with you. Of course, some vendors still will say, hey, I'm only going to ask for the public review if it's 5-star or,
Right.
that's also fine, but we think best practice is just ask everyone.
I had Richard White, the CEO of Fathom, on the show recently, and they have obviously hugely benefited from their G2 reviews. Very successful campaign there, and he talked a lot about kind of the value and how important that was to them, and how they monitored that G2 as a really critical channel for building that credibility in the early days for their solution.
Yeah. And I will say, I mean, also investors use it now.
Mhm.
We have we call it a data solutions business where we sell G2 data to VCs as well as private equity investors because they're also all becoming more data driven. So it is a great way to obviously build brand and kind of show your momentum to the world, right? Both your prospects and your investors.
Yep. Now you've talked about AI, being a bigger shift than the advent of the internet. I think, echoed by many others as well. What do you think is the kind of the most overhyped promise of AI in B2B today, and kind of maybe what's one of the most underappreciated?
And maybe I'd say what's overrated is like kind of full driverless. Yeah, it reminds me, and it's a good analogy. Like Elon keeps saying, "Hey, the car's going to drive itself," and it's been next year for a decade. And I think the same thing. The idea of like, or even like full automation of even like a BDR outreach process.
Right.
I don't think that's happened yet. I think AI is the most amazing assistant and can make obviously your SDR, your outreach much better, but I don't think it's full driverless yet. I think it's a great assistant. And I think a lot of us have learned and I think that's true in most applications. We also say it in our all hands meetings, like AI, it's not going to replace human employees. It will replace employees that don't use AI. And so we're really encouraging everyone to obviously use the tooling to automate their workflows. And there's so many creative ways we can do it or assist themselves, but I don't think it's going to fully automate most jobs.
What do you think, I guess, how does AI you launch your own AI assistants as part of G2, and you've got this AI roadshow coming up. Tell me a little bit more about kind of the G2 AI roadmap, and how does AI fit into your plans?
Yeah, no, I think one of the things we're really excited about G2 is our AI Monty agent. And we see AI Monty being the ultimate advisor to the software buyer. And in some ways, it could be like your smartest analyst or eccentric consultant in an AI. And obviously, we train that AI. We're building it on top of ChatGPT, in partnership with OpenAI. But then we train it on all our unique G2 data, the over 3 million reviews, our category taxonomy, and we just guide it to be a professional software buying advisor and to really help you. And I think it's challenging in software now that we do have 2,000 categories. Most software buyers, they're not looking, they're business people. They're looking to solve a business problem. They're not looking for a specific category. And those of us in enterprise software, we love nerding out and category creation, and we do a ton of it. But the buyer's just like, hey, I'm trying to solve a problem. And the problem could be sales forecasting. You're a CRO and you're like, hey, how do I better forecast? You're not necessarily looking for a certain type of software. But then the nice thing with Monty, we can ask more questions like what industry you're in, what, are you selling B2B, B2C? What's your typical sales cycle? And then based on that, we can actually make a more nuanced recommendation of, here's both the apps and the categories you should be shopping in to solve that business problem. And so we think Monty is a great unlock as a virtual software buying advisor and expert. And then on the other side of our marketplace, we are also training Monty to be at least an inbound SDR. And so this could be on your coffee.ai profile. You could train it with your sales FAQs, and it could answer questions like, hey, how do you integrate to Salesforce? How do you integrate to HubSpot? And likely some of your reviewers will have commented on it. And also you can just upload or, point us to your own sales FAQs. And then Monty can also give contextual answers about your product, or it could be about pricing and, all those things that probably are in that initial qualifying call. The Monty AI agent can also do for the seller. And then it can, if you want, you can also train it to say, hey, book a demo, get into your trial, or even buy a starter edition. And so we see on both sides of the marketplace, it's going to be a great assistant for the software buyer and the seller, allow them to connect more efficiently, and then, allow it to drive faster buying, which means faster selling, faster conversion for the software seller.
Is the mode of interaction text only, or can you do voice and video as well?
Right now, it's all kind of AI-based, text-based chat, but we are really excited. We're soon going to be also launching voice. And then the other thing we're excited about is reimagining reviews, because right now our reviews, they're a bit of a painful online survey form. And like all online forms, nobody really loves filling them in. And some of our reviews, let's say for CRM software, might even have 37 questions.
Wow.
And that's obviously great in the sense we get a lot of insight on particular features and how the user are rating them, but it's a pain if you're the reviewer filling that in. And so we envision the future, it's going to be more free-form AI chat, obviously whether you want to use a text interface or a voice interface or even video. And then we just parse out the structured data. And we also will get a lot more rich unstructured data. And I think the AI conversation can go in interesting ways. So I think it's going to be much more of a dynamic interview, if you will, of the software user. And we're also envisioning the future is it could be multi-party. Because the reality, if somebody's buying a CRM system, yes, they want the opinion of the CRO, but they probably also want the opinion of the RevOps person. They want the opinion of a CIO, of marketing. And so we're also envisioning the future, there could be an AI interview of multiple personas at the customer and kind of have the conversation around how they're using a particular CM system. And then we'll just get an incredibly rich amount of information that we can use to much better inform the software buyer. And so I think we're really excited with AI to totally reimagine the review. And I think that's actually going to be one thing. And I'm curious. I imagine, it's also part of your vision, Doug, for coffee. But I think a lot of people are saying the same things happen with CRM systems, which are kind of a series of forms. And I know you and I both worked at Salesforce, right? You ran Sales Cloud, and still traditionally most people have their account, their opportunity, their contact objects, and then they have a certain amount of required fields, right? But they're online forms, and same thing. No rep ever has loved filling those in. And it seems with AI, people are saying, wow, you don't need all those forms anymore, right? Like the rep can just have conversations, you record them, parse their emails, and you fill in all the structured data for them. And I think that's going to happen with CRM systems, but that's also what's going to happen with reviews, right? Like just have unstructured conversations, pull the structure out that the system needs, but don't force the user to enter it. And is that, I'm curious, is that your vision in coffee as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, part of our vision for coffee is, to minimize any amount of manual data entry. So take the exhaust that's sitting there, never throw away data, give people kind of ChatGPT style interfaces to it. But the other thing I think that's interesting, I think this is broader than just what we're doing in coffee. I think this is enterprise software in general. I think a lot of it is almost going to be like this conversation and configuration, right? That you said. So I think it's going to be like, hey, listen, I'm doing a CPQ system. Here's, if you haven't already figured it out by looking at my website, let me tell you about my products. Let me tell you about my value proposition. Let me tell you about, kind of what is our discount structure. Let me tell you, and just be able to chat about these things and not have to have this, multi-week, or in some cases in enterprise software, as you know, multi-month or year plus, configuration exercise. So I think there's a tremendous value that's coming there, where the onboarding wizard is almost just a conversation you're having. And at the end of it, you suddenly got a populated piece of software that's configured to your specific business.
And I think you're right. The onboarding piece, like just having conversation, and I imagine your coffee agent could do it, right? You could just ask them, hey, how do you want to do your forecasting? And how do you want to track your opportunities? And you just have a conversation with the CRO. And then at the end of that conversation, sounds like your system will use AI to just reconfigure itself
Yeah.
based on that CRO's preferences. Now that's really cool.
Yeah, but by the time this episode comes out, we'll have launched. We've launched a bunch of these free tools. So one was CRM Grader to let you kind of evaluate the data quality in your CRM. The next one is ICP Builder, where just in natural language you can tell me what your ideal customer profile looks like, and we'll say we think we heard this, and show you all the selects, and then tell you how many companies are in that. And then if you want, you can connect if you have an existing CRM, we could even tell you, hey, this is how many companies you've got in your CRM that match your ICP profile, and these are how many are in the world that aren't yet in your CRM. Same thing for buyer persona. So I think there's a bunch of that stuff that is, we're just scratching the surface. I think one of the sayings that we have at Coffee is you can't have good AI with bad data. So much of our focus in the beginning days is how do we really make sure that we're getting high quality data into the system in a format and a structure that scales, as well as that we can act on.
Yeah, no, that's the big problem, as you and I know, having been in CRM for a long time. And I know that was true when I was at Salesforce, and this was like a decade ago. But any customer I talked to, like, you'd always be like, "Oh, I'd love to implement your CPQ, but my data, my CRM is so bad, I can't do it." And then we'd say, "No, like, there's ways to work around that." But I think almost any CRM system, and frankly, probably whether it's HubSpot or Salesforce, right? Most people just have a lot of bad data in there, and AI is bad if the data is bad.
Yeah, although the AI, I'll give you a super simple thing that we use AI for. There's parts throughout the product, but like simple stuff like we have a bunch of data vendors that we license data from, and so we do automatic enrichment as part of the product. But those descriptions might be anywhere from a sentence fragment to 3 paragraphs description, and you don't want to read 3 paragraphs about a company. We want 100 characters, 150 characters. So we use AI to make a smart summary for what all those companies do. So you can go land on a company page and say, oh yeah, what does G2 do again? I know. So there's a bunch of the data hygiene stuff that AI helps with throughout the product. And I'm sure with yours as well. you talk about kind of the open AI piece. I mean, I think there's also this interesting boundary between what you can do in open AI with ChatGPT, Perplexity, pick your weapon of choice, and what you go to a specific system for. So as you see more and more capabilities coming to these through these LLMs, how do you see that line being where people are going to directly to something like ChatGPT to ask questions for reviews versus coming to G2?
Yeah. No, and I think you're right. The trend in online shopping in general is to go, more buyers are going to LLMs, no matter what they're shopping for. And I think one of the other big trends, especially on Google now, is they have that AI summary at the very top, which is obviously very useful because you used to have to do like 5 searches to learn stuff. Now they give you that nice AI summary, on whatever topic you're querying. So we do see at the margin, more software buyers are also going to start in the LLMs, and they're relying on the summaries. And so I think one of the things, though, we're also working on is proving the influence.
Hmm.
And I think we have a new strategy for G2, which is G2 everywhere. And I think our original vision was we're going to put kind of the ultimate trusted place you go for software. It was like, hey, get everyone to G2.com. But we're realizing in the age of AI, that's probably not going to happen. So now we say, hey, we have a G2 everywhere strategy. And we're G2, our goal is to provide the most trusted data on software. But then to make sure it syndicates. And, and as you know, ChatGPT, Perplexity, they provide answers based on data they train on. And same thing with Gemini. And, I saw an analysis of Google AI, but it's actually interesting. G2 was something like the 150th most influential site in terms of the content that, Google AI has been trained on. And now we're actually partnering. There's a cool startup called Profound.
Okay.
And they were started specifically to measure AI LLM influence for brands. And so, because I think every brand now, any company you're running is wondering, hey, ChatGPT is giving this answer. They even work with companies like McDonald's. Yeah, because like McDonald's is interested in, hey, if you type like, what's the best burger in San Francisco? And McDonald's may not come up number one. There's a lot of good boutiques, but every brand, every business is now like, why is Perplexity giving that answer? And so they do a bunch of analytics, and they actually use like, I think, test queries. But they can say, hey, what's the biggest influencer? If you type into ChatGPT, what's the best CRM software? What, site or sites are the top influencers of that? And one cool thing, enterprise software across the board, we've done analysis with Profound where we are the number one influencer of the AI answers around enterprise software topics. Obviously, just like SEO, it varies by specific question and specific query.
Right.
And so we're also, aiming to build awareness around that, hey, that magical answer you're giving by ChatGPT, it's trained on some site. And sometimes Perplexity, sometimes they give you the drill down link, sometimes they don't, right? But I think it's a new way also for marketers and brands to think. And we do think a third-party site like G2, because we do have strong domain, we have, kind of a trusted domain, it's going to be a heavy influencer of LLMs. And then secondly, the G2 everywhere strategy is also people or software providers going to more marketplaces. I think one huge trend, I think more and more cloud software is now bought through AWS Marketplace or Azure Marketplace or Google GCP Marketplace. And so we're also syndicating our G2 reviews there. So G2 is already syndicated to AWS Marketplace. It's syndicated to Azure Marketplace. So that's all part of the everywhere. Like, hey, let's create the trusted content. And actually AWS and Azure want our content because they also recognize for enterprise software, G2 has the best review-based content, what real users are thinking. And so that's kind of how we're adapting. Because we recognize, not every buyer is going to come to our website anymore. And I think that's going to be true for most websites where, everyone has to adapt and figure out how do you drive AI influence. And then obviously, how do you prove your AI influence?
Well, you've built such a strong brand there that I think that kind of powered by G2 strategy or the G2 everywhere piece, I think is going to be very successful. And I happen to be a huge Perplexity is kind of my go-to for any query these days. And I love the fact that everything is referenceable. So I'm often clicking on those links and going off on that journey.
True. And probably the other LLMs will have to follow.
Yeah.
And that's probably true because like a lot of times we get the AI summary, we're done, but then sometimes you're like, oh, I want to learn more.
Right.
And you're right, having those. And I think that's probably going to be some hybrid world. I think Google's also heading there. You have an AI summary and then you still have links if you want to drill down and learn more.
So let's shift gears a little bit in terms of, go to market. You've seen, obviously, you've done it multiple times in your own companies. You've seen it, you've invested in a ton of companies, and you've obviously seen hundreds, if not thousands, through the G2 marketplace. It's noisy out there, right? So with so many kind of these SaaS companies struggling to stand out, what do you see kind of as the most common mistake founders making in their go-to-market strategy?
Yeah. No, and I will say it is very noisy out there. And on G2 now we have almost 200,000 listings of different software and enterprise AI solutions. That's growing still 23% year over year. And so that means, in a given year now, there'll be 46,000 more listings on G2.
Crazy.
And AI is also making it easier, as you know, right? All these coding assistants. And obviously with the cloud, it's easier than ever to spin up a startup. And so there's more and more noise. And I think that is the number one challenge for every entrepreneur is like, how do you break through the noise? Because even if you have the best new mousetrap, right, the best new AI tool, but nobody knows about it, it doesn't matter. And so I think it's a big challenge for everyone. And I do think, I do think customer voice, and it's always been true, right? I think now when you're starting a startup, I think initially you want your design partner customers, right? Like that's probably, like where you have your 10 or 20 customers. First, you make them happy. At the beginning, it's not scalable at all. But then I'd say the next thing you do once they're happy, have them start advocating for you. And because I think word of mouth, and this happens anyway, especially like amongst us founders, like imagine, and we were doing a Salesforce Venture Summit, right? Everyone's asking each other, oh, what is the best coding AI tool? Which one are you using and why? And, so there's obviously word of mouth and that'll always be there. And if you make your customers happy, that'll happen. But we do think, sites like G2 and reviews, getting your customer advocates to publicly advocate for you, it just can kind of put that on steroids. And I think that's true on a category on G2. If there's 500 AI coding assistants, and you're looking at that, you're going to be, and it's just like an online consumer, like on Amazon, most stuff I'm buying, like I'm probably going to buy the stuff that has the most reviews, good or bad, because at least I know a lot of people are using it. And then one cool thing on G2, you can also see, and we have a LinkedIn partnership, as you know, but you can also see, hey, your first degree LinkedIn connections, which of them have actually written reviews, and people that are trusted in your network because, and you and I both know Tomer, now the global product leader for all of LinkedIn, but he's also always said this. He's like, hey, to him, a review, what's more important is actually who wrote it versus even what they said. Because let's say you're looking for a data science tool and it's like it's like Tomer's best friend who's the best data science expert in the world. Like whatever they say, you'll probably go with, right? You probably still want some more color. So I think also knowing who wrote it, and that goes back to if you're an enterprise entrepreneur trying to break through, like if you get some influential customers, and I remember we actually did this at Steelbrick, the second CQ company met, there's a friend of mine, Lars Nielsen, you might know him.
Yep.
Kind of famous in the Valley. And that time he was at Cloudera and he was their VP of RevOps and SDR. And we got, we made him a successful Steelbrick customer at Cloudera. And then we're like, hey, Lars, will you write a review? And we hadn't write a review on the App Exchange as well as on G2. And part of that also saved us time because the other thing in an early stage startup, a lot of people are like, oh, I need a reference. I need a reference, Doug. And then I think that's actually happened to us with Lars where we were overtaxing him. And Matt Gorniak, he was our CRO, kind of my business partner in all these ventures. And anyway, at one point, I remember Lars called Matt. He's like, hey, Matt, I can't do any more references. And Matt was like, what do you mean? Like, are you unhappy? And he's just like, no, like I've got a day job and I did 10 for you last month. I'm done. Yeah. And then we're like, okay, Lars, why don't you do a video review? Yep. Which he did, posted on G2, and then we could just point people there. And obviously we had like 50 great influential VPs of RevOps in the Valley. And Steelbrick, that was our focus. Our ICP was like growth tech companies. And once we had like 50 of them do reviews with their LinkedIn profile, we would just point people there. And I was like, oh, okay, got it. They saw the people. Maybe some of them sent Lars a LinkedIn message and like, hey, does this shit really work? Great. And so I think you can get that viral flywheel spinning through your customers. And I think that's probably the only way to break through, because at the end of the day, people trust their peers. And so if you take great care of your design partners, your initial customers, and get them to publicly start advocating for you,
yep,
I think that's how you're going to break through the noise.
Especially, I think with kind of more enterprise software like CPQ, right? It's not something where somebody's going to be like, "I'll try this out myself on the weekend," right? And or like a tool I'm hearing a ton about these days and using myself as granola as a, audio note taker. And, that's obviously not a G2 review kind of, scenario. I mean, they could have reviews up there as well, but it's really just been pure word of mouth spreading. I think they targeted the VC community first and kind of spread through like wildfire throughout that community. And then suddenly was like, oh, okay, then this is something. But you're right. If it's something where somebody's saying, I need to talk to 3 reference customers, it's got to be something that scales, and video in G2 is a phenomenal way to do that.
For sure.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of just leadership. You've talked to, I've read some of your stuff and followed the pieces you've done online. You've talked about the importance of sharing weakness as a leader or vulnerability. Can you kind of share a moment where kind of vulnerability really kind of made a difference or broke through to your company or team?
Yeah, no, and I think as an entrepreneur, I've been doing it 25 years, so I've been through a lot of hard times. And I think you also know, Doug, like, at times entrepreneurship's like glamorous and at times it's extremely humbling. And not in the like, I'm humbled to win this award way, but just like, but humbling in that, like a lot of people will think you're an idiot and they'll say it publicly. And I remember I had the beginning of the pandemic, I had a Business Insider kind of hit piece on me. And it was kind of, and what they were saying was true. But I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, and you probably remember this time, 2020, like March, April-ish. I think everyone, including my investors, myself, everyone thought the world was ending. And so all of a sudden, we decided, and the G2 had been growing really well through that SaaS boom phase, but all of a sudden we're like, wow, we're at risk. We're probably overspending. So we had to do a layoff right at the beginning of the pandemic. And I remember just before that, we'd actually done a great build out of we built a beautiful new Chicago office and built this beautiful staircase, kind of as a meeting community area. But then I remember like the, Business Insider headline was something like, I don't remember exactly what it was, but like, oh, but basically it was like, yeah, Godard's like, walking people up this new $1 million staircase to lay them off. And they had a picture of me with like money bags and just very sarcastic mocking, and they had quotes of former employees saying, oh, and I think I understood why, because it did seem, obviously in hindsight, I'd overinvested, right, and hadn't anticipated and then had to adapt quickly. And then obviously a lot of people get critical. And like I said, I can understand the criticism, but it never feels good. It actually really hurts. And then, but I think also being authentic with our team about that, in our all hands meeting that, hey, it is on me and I had overinvested and, now the revenue growth isn't coming as fast as I promised our investors. So I have to course correct. I have to do a layoff and I own it. And that's like one moment, but I do think it helps if you're vulnerable, you own your mistakes as a leader. And, I've gotten better over 25 years, but I'm still making new mistakes every day as an entrepreneur. I think that's part of the thrill of it, but then owning it, like I screwed up and now, I have to correct it and, and then being open with your team and saying you're sorry when you have put the team in a bad position or when you're in a position where you have to do a layoff. And then you always look back and you're like, wow, I wish I'd anticipated this. I wish I'd steered the ship better. And I think being open about that with your team and the community, ultimately can help you get through it.
Yeah, I remember my first startup. I had the, brand new CEO and just assumed I had to have all the answers. I had to show no weakness, right? And it was clearly not the way to do it. And I just did a post on LinkedIn from, again, our mutual friend, Tomer Cohen, who had this phrase I love, I may be wrong, but I'm not confused, which I love because it's very much about like, hey, I'm gonna talk very confidently because this is where I think we're going, but doesn't mean I'm always right, right? And you should challenge me if you think I'm not. And when I realize I've made a mistake, I'm also going to speak up and tell you about that. So it's all so it's also okay to make mistakes, right? Because everybody
Yeah.
does.
Yeah. No, and I think I like that quote from Tomer, and but I think it's like being confident because you have to look forward, right, as an entrepreneur, as a leader, and make confident decisions, but then also realizing, hey, sometimes you're wrong, and then you admit it and you course correct. And then you can get better. And I think if we don't about that with your teams and hopefully have everyone have that mindset, then you can, build more trust and hopefully also get better faster together, make more mistakes, but correct them quicker.
So, you've not even G2 isn't your only startup that you're involved with. So you have 3D Kit, and I know you're an investor and active advisor and a number of others. You know, how do you kind of avoid burnout? Right? What are some of the things that you do to kind of protect your mental health and model that for your team?
Yeah, and actually, it took me a long time to learn that because during building my first company, Big Machines, and it was about a dozen years, and until we sold it to Oracle, and at the end of that journey, I was burned out, and I probably wouldn't have admitted it at the time, but it was just such a grind and years of feeling like I was failing, and just so much fear and anxiety and doubt in my own head that it made it really rough. And I think before I started G2, I did take a few months off, and I was with my wife and kids, and she was like, "Oh, you seem so depressed. What's wrong with you?" And one, I was burned out, like I just needed a rest. And then two, though, at some point I realized, wow, I missed it. I also missed having a team and building and that challenge, that thrills, the highs and the lows of building together. And I think you have the same addiction, Doug. A
I do.
lot
The
of us
disease.
entrepreneurs too. Like when we have like when we're building, sometimes we're like, I just wish I had a break. And then you take a break and then you're like, oh, I want it again. But I think what has changed for me, I got a conscious leadership coach.
Mhm.
Actually, at the end of my Big Machines journey, Jim Dethmer's his name. And
Okay.
he also wrote a book on conscious leadership. He has a community under conscious.is.
Yeah.
And I started getting coaching from him. And then I think, because I said I'm going to build another company, G2, but I'm like, I don't want to be so miserable. So how can I still express my entrepreneurial energy and desire, but not kill myself and feel so burned out all the time? And I think a lot of it now, I've been doing this conscious leadership work. I still have a conscious leadership coach, Heather Frick, who's also a kind of a
Yeah.
disciple of Jim Dethmer.
Yeah.
And I do coaching at least monthly. But a lot of it's about presence. So I started meditating,
Mhm.
aiming to also do better self-care, working out every day, doing something outdoors every day. And so I've realized, wow, actually taking a couple hours at least every day for yourself, it's a worthwhile investment. As an entrepreneur, a lot of times it feels like, oh, I should be hustling all the time, right? And I should either be working or sleeping. But I realized I did that my first startup and I was just burned out. I lost all my energy and figured there's no way I could still be building 25 years later if I didn't start taking better care of myself. So I think it's that, yeah, conscious, both self-care, and then I also try to bring it to my team in the form of conscious leadership. So being more authentic, kind of what we talked about earlier, sharing my vulnerabilities, sharing my weaknesses, not trying to be perfect, but showing up more consciously, more authentically in my work, and even with my wife and my family and my kids. Like, it's all helped tremendously. And I still feel the stress and the anxiety, it's real, but I feel like I get much better deal with it and not get burned out, and just through continual better self-care, better consciousness.
It's a very common theme having over these conversations on the podcast about this kind of, you know, being out in. I just was talking to Max Altschuler, was talking about being in nature, talking with Kyle Norton, who talks about working out every day. Like all of this is a very common theme, and I'm trying to do the same. I think I had to force myself to go outside and see the sunshine in the morning before I sat down on my laptop, and even just that simple act was a struggle for me for a while because I'm just
Mhm.
like, well, there's work I know that's waiting for me. I've got to go check Slack. I've got to
Yeah, you
go.
feel guilty not going right to your email, right?
Right. But even just that feeling of walking out my front door and being like, oh, the sun is on my face. Okay, makes a huge difference. And I've just even been doing, grab a bite to eat and then go take a little 15-minute walk in nature. Like nature is really for me just such a balancing thing. So I think maybe it's the wisdom of our years doing this. But I feel like I'm much more efficient doing this than I was, the first or second time around.
Yeah, and you probably also, I don't know if you follow the Huberman podcast, but he talks about that, right? How important sunlight is. And I often think about, like, he talks about your first 90 minutes. Like, I think it's kind of the opposite of what I probably did my first company. It was like, grab a coffee and go to your email. It's like, hey, don't do that, right?
Right.
Go outside, get some sunshine, do some meditation, drink some water, like connect a little bit with nature before you just start the digital grind. But it's harder, I think, when you're younger because you have so much ambition. And I guess one advantage of being older, it's a little bit easier to have that perspective. But I wish I'd done it in my 20s when I was building my first company. I didn't. So hopefully the younger entrepreneurs out there, hopefully, and leaders, hopefully you all start doing it earlier than I did.
Hopefully they all do. It pays dividends for sure. I know we're running up on time here, but let me just ask you a few kind of wrap up questions. So, first of all, Just talk about the giving back piece, because I think that's also been a big part of certainly the culture at G2 and maybe previous companies. So tell me how you think about that in the context of your company culture and building out G2.
And we do have a G2 Gives initiative,
Mm.
and it is inspired. We've also done Pledge 1%.
Yep, same
And
here.
I was inspired here by Mark Benioff, the founder of Salesforce. But, we've committed 1% of our equity. And hopefully one day at G2, we have a big outcome. And we're committing that to tech education.
Nice.
So I think there's one piece of it that's philanthropy. The other part is volunteering.
Mhm.
So we also have a bunch of ERGs at G2 that, organize local volunteering events. And this includes our team in Bangalore. And it could be like with organizations like Girls Who Code or whatever our teams are passionate about giving back. And then ideally, it's also applying product. And so our case, that could be to nonprofit software and actually helping them grow for free for G2. And so we have built it, into our model. And like I said, I do think Mark Benioff was a pioneer here. And, we're actually leveraging, and they've built a whole Pledge 1% organization now, and they actually have tools and templates to make this easier. And so it does, I think it helps our teams being more inspired and more connected to our vision, based on the fact that we're also giving back.
I would recommend, we're members of Pledge 1% as well, and I would recommend any startup founder to do it in the beginning, because the hard part is when you start getting when the stock you start going through your later rounds, it's harder for you to suddenly say, "Oh, let me just set aside 1%." But in the beginning, it's like, "What's 1%? Let's go do that." And, hopefully it becomes something that's very interesting. And I think that I almost wish that it was one of those things that was kind of part of the standard term sheet, right? And the
True.
entrepreneurs did. I think it was just part of what every startup did at the beginning.
Yeah. Another good, cool story there. I was executive chairman of Logic, which was
Fun.
announced, just a month ago being acquired by ServiceNow.
Mhm.
And Chris, the founder there, he did Pledge 1% day one. And now, it's going to be pretty significant philanthropic win built in. And, but you're right, day one, it's easy. Once you have a bunch of VCs, institutional investors, then they always have the question, well, I have to go to my LPs, right?
Right.
And so I totally agree. The sooner you build that in, the better.
So let's just broaden the aperture here on AI. If you could kind of think of your own life and automate one thing with AI, what would it
Mhm.
be?
I would say meeting follow up.
Mm, great
And
one.
I'm doing it partially, but oftentimes, probably like you, Doug, I'm in back to backs.
Yep.
And then I don't follow up right away and as well as I'd like, which probably, and follow up is probably half the value of a meeting, at least. So, and I'll do it as well and as quickly as possible. And I think obviously all the tools we're using, like Zoom, they all have tools, but I'd love to take it one step further where I just finished a meeting and like even you and I after this podcast, right? I had an email draft to like, hey, Doug, thank you for the podcast. It's pretty personalized. Maybe I do one tweak and I hit send. But I think nailing that use case for me would actually have huge value. And it also usually feels tedious. You know what I mean? So I would love that to be fully automated with AI.
We'll go offline. I'll show you coffee.
Okay.
Because basically I'm the same. I'm terrible at follow up. I'm terrible at keeping like things fall through the cracks all the time. And so in a lot of ways, what we're building is for me, right? Just to make me look a little less
All right.
discombobulated.
You'll have
But
to show me that feature.
I will. I will. What's something you're passionate about that might surprise people?
I would say, well, I kind of mentioned earlier, but I do love Strava
Uh-huh.
and posting a Strava workout daily.
Uh-huh.
And it's honestly also the one like social network I kind of binge on. And I love sharing pictures of my dogs, especially I go on hikes oftentimes and I'll post out on Strava. And there's a Strava dogs group that I love.
That's amazing. I love the story of Strava too. Like Mark Gainey, I don't know if you know the founding story. Mark Gainey, who'd started Kana, was supposedly just built it for himself. He's like, I just need something to keep track of my runs with my friends, and that's my version of retirement, is just like building little hacky things like that, and maybe some take off, and it doesn't matter if they do or not. So I love Strava as well. What is one thing you can't live without in your daily routine?
I would say now it's cold plunging.
Oh,
And I'm sad when I'm on the road, I can't do it, but I'm lucky I have one in my yard now. And I love doing it every day because it just both as kind of a intense meditation presence thing. And then I just feel more energy all day.
okay, I'm gonna geek on this with you for a minute, because I'm building a deck and doing a whole sauna cold plunge outdoor shower thing. What is your kind of routine in terms of, how much time you're in, temperature, all that stuff?
Probably my daily I aim for is 5 minutes
Oh,
and somewhere between 45 and 50 Fahrenheit.
nice. Nice. And do you just do the cold plunge, or do you alternate it with contrast with sauna?
I just have a hot tub next to it.
Okay.
Like kind of a cool setup where, one side's hot tub, the other side's cold. I usually do a little bit of hot first, kind of
Okay.
treat myself, if you will, then I do the cold.
It is bracing. It is bracing. No, I'm looking forward to it. I'm at a place called the Portal here that a VC Tim Chang set up here in Mill Valley, and they've got cold plunge and sauna and stuff like that. It's a really nice part of the workday to kind of be able to have access to that. And finally, just how can listeners stay in touch with you and kind of help you on G2's mission?
Yeah, well, one, I do love LinkedIn. So it's Godard Abel LinkedIn, and my email is godard@g2.com.
Yep.
Which you have to enter to link in with me, but I'd say let's connect there. And obviously, I just welcome, obviously, if you're an entrepreneur, want to list your product on G2, it's freemium. You get validation for free. And then if you have feedback, ideas, how to make G2 better, love hearing from you. And LinkedIn's a great way to do it.
Awesome. Godard, thank you for taking the time. Really enjoy the conversation.
Yeah, great to be with you, Doug.